The afternoon sun blazed through the windows of Denver International Airport as 13-year-old Emma Rodriguez clutched her boarding pass. Gate 23. Seat 12A. United Flight 447 to Seattle. Nothing special about any of it. Traveling alone, sweetie? The gate agent smiled that practiced airline smile, the kind adults give kids they think need extra watching. Yes, ma'am, Emma said quietly, handing over her ticket. The woman's smile got bigger. Well, aren't you brave? Flying all by yourself. Your parents must be so proud. Emma didn't correct her. Didn't say that her mom was gone, had been gone for 3 years now. Didn't mention that her dad worked overseas and her aunt was waiting in Seattle. She just nodded and walked down the jetway, her worn backpack bouncing against her shoulders. The other passengers barely looked at her. Just another kid on a plane. Probably visiting relatives. Probably bored. Probably going to spend the whole flight on her phone or tablet like kids do. They had no idea who she really was. Emma settled into her window seat and pulled out her tablet. To anyone watching, she looked like every other teenager, headphones on, eyes on the screen, ignoring the world. The businessman next to her glanced over and chuckled. Probably assumes I'm watching TikTok, Emma thought. But her screen showed something different. Technical diagrams. Aircraft schematics. Emergency procedures written in dense military language that would make most adults' heads spin. Nobody noticed. Nobody ever did. The flight attendant stopped by, bending down with that automatic kid-friendly voice. Can I get you something to drink once we're up, honey? We have apple juice, Sprite. Water's fine. Thank you. Emma barely looked up. Okay, sweetie. You just press that button if you need anything. The plane pushed back from the gate 7 minutes late. Normal for a Friday afternoon. The Boeing 737 rumbled down the runway and lifted into Colorado's blue sky, banking west toward Seattle. Emma kept her eyes on the tablet, occasionally glancing out the window at the Rocky Mountains falling away below. She traced her finger along a diagram, hydraulic systems, flight controls, emergency rerouting procedures. She'd memorized these documents hundreds of times, but she kept studying anyway. Because that's what her mother would have done. What nobody on that plane knew, what the kind flight attendant and the businessman and the couple taking selfies in front of her couldn't possibly know, was that Emma's mother had been Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Rodriguez, one of the most brilliant fighter pilots the United States Air Force had ever produced. What they didn't know was that Sarah Rodriguez had died 3 years ago during a classified test flight, leaving behind a 13-year-old daughter and research that could change everything about how pilots handled emergencies. What they definitely didn't know was that before she died, Sarah Rodriguez's call sign had been Falcon 1, a name spoken with reverence in Air Force squadrons across the country. And they certainly didn't know that in a private military ceremony, Emma's family had made the unprecedented decision to transfer that call sign to Sarah's daughter, hoping that one day she might honor her mother's legacy. Emma had spent 3 years doing exactly that. While other kids worried about grades and friends and normal teenager stuff, Emma had buried herself in her mother's work. The Air Force had given her access to Sarah's personal flight notes and research documents, partly out of respect, partly as grief therapy, partly because nobody thought a kid would actually understand the advanced aviation concepts in those classified files. They'd been wrong about that. Emma had absorbed everything. Every technical detail about F-22 fighter jet systems. Every emergency procedure her mother had documented. Every unconventional maneuver that Sarah had pioneered during test flights. She'd studied with an intensity that only grief could fuel. Her mother was gone. But her mother's knowledge remained. The tablet in Emma's lap contained copies of her mother's final research project, emergency recovery procedures for catastrophic F-22 failures that the Air Force had deemed too dangerous to officially adopt. Sarah had been developing these procedures during test flights, pushing the fighter jet beyond normal limits to understand what was possible in impossible situations. The Air Force had classified the research but never made it official training. They thought Sarah's approaches were too risky, too far outside standard procedures. Sarah Rodriguez had died proving those procedures worked. The official letter said, "Systems failure during classified operations, military language 4, we can't tell you exactly what your mother was doing when she died, but she died doing it courageously." The unofficial whispers Emma had overheard suggested her mother had been testing emergency sequences that other pilots thought were impossible. Emma touched the screen gently, her finger resting on a diagram her mother had drawn by hand. Sarah's handwriting filled the margins. "Conventional wisdom says this can't work. But conventional wisdom hasn't been tested under real combat pressure. Theory suggests we can maintain control through secondary pathways if we accept temporary instability. Nobody wants to accept that trade-off. But in real emergencies, temporary instability beats certain death." Emma had read those words 1,000 times. Her mother had died proving that taking unconventional risks could save lives. The Air Force hadn't wanted to hear it then. They'd filed Sarah's research away, honored her memory, and moved on. Flight 447 reached cruising altitude somewhere over Utah. The seatbelt sign chimed off. The pilot announced smooth flying ahead. The flight attendant came by with Emma's water, setting it down with a napkin. "Doing okay, hon? That's some serious-looking stuff you're reading there." She'd glanced at the tablet but clearly didn't register what she was seeing. Just complicated diagrams. Probably some school project. "I'm fine, thank you," Emma said with the polite smile that had become automatic. Adults were always kind to her. Always concerned. Always completely oblivious to who she actually was. The businessmen dozed off. The couple in front kept taking pictures. Normal people doing normal things on a normal Friday flight. Emma went back to her technical manuals, reviewing emergency hydraulic procedures for the 1,000th time. She knew these by heart, could probably recite them in her sleep, but she kept reviewing anyway. Her mother had been famous for meticulous preparation. For reviewing procedures until they became instinct. For making knowledge live in muscle memory instead of just conscious thought. "If you ever need this knowledge in a real emergency," Sarah had written in her notes, "you won't have time to think through the steps. You need to have practiced so many times that your hands move before your brain finishes processing. That's the difference between alive and dead, the gap between thinking and doing." Emma wondered sometimes if her mother had been scared in those final moments. If there had been time to think about her daughter. If she had. "Oh my God, look at that." The woman across the aisle was suddenly pressed against her window, pointing outside with alarm in her voice. The kind of fear that makes other passengers look up from phones and books. Emma turned to her window and felt her breath catch. Outside, maybe 1,000 feet away and slightly below their altitude, was an F-22 Raptor. Emma recognized it instantly, the distinctive angular profile, the swept wings, the twin engines that made it the most powerful fighter jet in the American arsenal. But something was catastrophically wrong. Black smoke trailed from one engine. The fighter's flight pattern was erratic, wings rocking side to side in ways no pilot would ever do intentionally. As Emma watched, the Raptor suddenly dropped altitude in a barely controlled descent before leveling off, still trailing smoke. "Is that a military jet?" someone asked behind Emma, voice tight with concern. "Why is it smoking like that? Should we be worried?" The cabin suddenly buzzed with nervous energy. Passengers pressed against windows. Phones came out to record video. The flight attendants tried to maintain calm, but Emma could see the concern in their eyes. You didn't see smoking military fighters during routine commercial flights. Emma's hands went cold. Her mind was already cataloging what she was seeing, the pattern of smoke suggesting engine failure, the flight control issues visible in the erratic movements, the steady altitude loss the pilot was fighting to control. This wasn't a training exercise. This was a pilot in serious trouble. The intercom crackled. "Folks, this is Captain Williams from the flight deck. You may have noticed a military aircraft nearby. We've established radio contact with Air Force emergency frequencies. The fighter pilot is experiencing technical difficulties but is in contact with ground control. We're in no danger, but please remain seated with seatbelts fastened. Technical difficulties. Emma almost laughed at the understatement. That F-22 wasn't having technical difficulties. It was dying in midair. She pressed her face against the window, watching the Raptor struggle. The smoke had intensified. Now she could see what looked like fluid trailing from the aircraft, hydraulic fluid, which would explain the control issues. The fighter dropped another 100 feet in an uncontrolled descent before recovering. Emma's trained eye recognized what she was seeing, a pilot with degrading flight controls, fighting a battle against physics that was rapidly being lost. The cabin speakers crackled again, but this time it wasn't the captain. It was military radio communications, patched through so passengers could hear. Catastrophic systems failure. Ejection seat malfunction. Cannot bail out. Repeat, cannot bail out. The pilot's voice was professional but strained. The forced calm of someone who knows they're probably about to die. Emma's heart hammered. Ejection seat malfunction meant the pilot was trapped in the aircraft. Without ejection capability, the pilot had to either regain control or ride the fighter all the way to impact. More radio chatter flooded the cabin. Falcon 7-7, this is Cobra Base. We're scrambling additional aircraft to your position. Hold together. Cobra Base, flight controls degrading rapidly. Hydraulic failures cascading. Trying emergency rerouting but nothing's responding according to procedure. Copy 7-7. We're pulling every tactical expert we have. Stay with it. Emma knew what she was hearing. She'd read about this exact scenario in her mother's notes. The specific pattern of failures, engine problems combined with hydraulic cascade failure combined with ejection system malfunction. This was the nightmare scenario that conventional Air Force doctrine said was unsurvivable. Her mother had believed it was survivable. Had died testing procedures that might prove it. And now Emma was watching a pilot trapped in exactly that scenario, listening to Air Force experts admit they didn't know how to save him. Except the research wasn't filed away. It was on a tablet in Seat 12A, memorized by a 13-year-old girl who'd spent 3 years obsessively studying her mother's work. Emma's hands shook. She was just a kid. 13 years old, wearing a faded hoodie and old sneakers. She had homework in her backpack and a permission slip she kept forgetting to get signed. But she was also Falcon 1. The radio chatter continued, increasingly desperate. Tried every recovery sequence we know. Nothing's working. Can you maintain altitude long enough to reach Peterson Air Force Base? Negative, Cobra Base. Losing control authority too fast. Hydraulics at 12% and falling. Emma unbuckled her seatbelt. The flight attendant appeared immediately. Honey, you need to stay seated. We're in an emergency situation. I know, Emma said quietly. I need to talk to the captain. It's about the F-22. The flight attendant's expression shifted to sympathy mixed with frustration. Probably thought this was a kid excited about military planes at the worst possible time. Sweetheart, the pilots are very busy. Tell the captain he needs to contact Air Force Command, Emma interrupted, her voice steady despite her shaking hands. Tell them I have information about recovery procedures for this specific failure pattern. Tell them. She paused, taking a breath, knowing what she was about to reveal. Tell them Falcon 1 needs to talk to Cobra Base immediately. The flight attendant blinked. Honey, I don't. The F-22 pilot is trapped in an aircraft with cascading hydraulic failures and a malfunctioning ejection seat, Emma said, her voice shifting from polite teenager to something else entirely. Something that made the flight attendant freeze. He's tried standard procedures and they're not working because this isn't a standard failure pattern. I know unconventional procedures that might save his life, but I need to talk to Air Force Command right now or that pilot dies. My call sign is Falcon 1. Check with the captain. Check with Air Force records. But do it fast because that pilot has maybe 3 minutes before complete control loss. The technical terminology, the calm authority, the specific knowledge, the flight attendant's expression transformed from dismissive concern to shock. She stared at Emma for a long moment, trying to reconcile the 13-year-old girl with the expertise that had just come out of that girl's mouth. "Stay here," the flight attendant said finally, and practically ran toward the cockpit. The businessman next to Emma was awake now, staring at her with confusion. Other passengers nearby had heard the exchange and were whispering, clearly not understanding what was happening. Emma ignored them all. Her eyes went back to the window where the F-22 continued its death spiral. The pilot was still fighting, still trying every procedure he knew. But the Raptor was losing altitude steadily, the control problems getting worse by the second. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory, words from a video recording Sarah had made: "If these procedures ever need to be used in a real emergency, whoever uses them needs to trust the aircraft beyond what their training tells them is safe. You're deliberately accepting instability to maintain control through secondary systems. It feels wrong. Every instinct screams you're making things worse. But the alternative is complete control loss." The cockpit door opened. Captain Williams emerged, looking stressed and bewildered. He walked quickly to Emma's row and crouched in the aisle, his eyes scanning her face like he was trying to solve a puzzle. "You said Falcon 1. His voice was quiet but intense. "Yes, sir. That's a military call sign that belonged to, he stopped, not wanting to say, a dead pilot, to a kid. "My mother," Emma said simply. "Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Rodriguez. She died 3 years ago during test flight operations. The call sign was transferred to me by my family. Check Air Force records. It's legitimate." Captain Williams's jaw tightened. "You're 13 years old." "Yes, sir." "How do you know about F-22 emergency procedures?" "My mother's research. She spent years developing unconventional recovery procedures for catastrophic failures. The Air Force gave me access to her classified materials after she died. I've studied them extensively. What's happening to that pilot right now? I've read the exact recovery procedures my mother developed for this specific situation. The Air Force has tactical experts working this problem right now." "Who are failing?" Emma said bluntly. "I've been listening. They're trying standard procedures that don't work for this failure pattern. My mother's procedures weren't standard. That's why the Air Force never officially adopted them. But she proved they work, and I know them." Williams looked at the flight attendant, then back at Emma. The calculation was obvious in his eyes: this was insane, trusting a teenager. But the alternative was watching a pilot die while they did nothing. "You understand if you're wrong." "If I'm wrong, that pilot dies," Emma said. "If nobody tries, that pilot dies. At least my way gives him a chance." Williams made his decision. "Come with me." Emma followed him to the cockpit, aware of every passenger watching her walk down the aisle. This kid in jeans and a hoodie, heading to the flight deck during a military emergency. The cockpit was cramped and loud with overlapping radio communications. The co-pilot glanced back with surprise as Emma entered. Williams slid into his seat and keyed the radio. "Cobra Base, this is United Flight 447. We have a passenger requesting urgent communication regarding Falcon 77's emergency." The response came immediately, a different voice now, deeper and carrying command authority. "United 447, this is General Hayes at Cobra Base Tactical Operations. We don't have time for civilian speculation." "General, the passenger identifies herself as Falcon 1, Williams interrupted. The radio went silent for 3 full seconds. Nothing but static. Emma could imagine the scene at Cobra Base, controllers freezing, officers turning to stare at radios, someone frantically pulling up records. When the general's voice came back, it was tight and controlled. Say again, United 447. Who is on your aircraft? Williams handed the headset to Emma. She took it with hands steadier than she felt, settled the headphones over her ears, and pressed the transmit button. Cobra Base, this is Falcon 1. My actual name is Emma Rodriguez. I'm the daughter of Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Rodriguez, who held the Falcon 1 designation until her death 3 years ago. The call sign was officially transferred to me by my family. Check your records. Another pause. She could hear muffled voices in the background, someone shouting about pulling files. Emma Rodriguez, the general said slowly. We have your records here. This is unprecedented. You're 13 years old. Yes, sir. Why are you on this frequency during a military emergency? Emma took a breath. This was it. Because I've been listening to Falcon 77 situation and I recognize the failure pattern. It matches research my mother conducted before she died, specific procedures for recovering from cascading hydraulic failures combined with ejection system malfunction. The Air Force classified her research but never officially adopted her procedures. I have access to all her materials. I've studied them extensively. What your tactical experts are trying right now isn't going to work because this scenario exceeds standard doctrine. My mother developed unconventional procedures specifically for this situation, and I can walk your pilot through them. With all respect to your mother's memory, the general said carefully, we have some of the most experienced F-22 pilots in the world working this problem. And they're failing, Emma interrupted. I don't mean disrespect, sir, but I've been listening. Your experts are trying by-the-book procedures that assume normal failures. This isn't normal. The specific combination of engine failure plus hydraulic cascade plus ejection malfunction creates a scenario where conventional wisdom gets pilots killed. My mother died proving there's an unconventional approach that works, but it requires accepting temporary instability and trusting secondary control pathways that standard doctrine says to avoid. Nobody wants to teach that because it sounds dangerous. But you know what's actually dangerous? What's happening to Falcon 77 right now while everyone tries safe procedures that don't work? The radio crackled with the general conferring with someone nearby. Voices too muffled to make out. Emma waited, watching through the cockpit windscreen as the F-22 continued losing altitude in the distance, smoke still trailing. Falcon 1, the general said finally, I'm going to patch you through to 77 directly. But understand, if your procedures make things worse, if that pilot dies because we trusted a teenager's advice over our expert's judgment, then I carry that for the rest of my life, Emma said quietly. Just like I carry knowing my mother died alone testing procedures that could have saved 77 if anyone had listened to her research. Put me through, sir. Please. There was a click, a burst of static, and then a different voice filled her headphones. This is Falcon 77. Who am I talking to? The pilot sounded exhausted and terrified in equal measure, trying to maintain professional calm while his aircraft disintegrated around him. 77, this is Falcon 1, Emma said, and even saying it made her throat tight. This was the first time she'd used her inherited call sign operationally. I'm going to help you save your aircraft. But you need to trust me, and what I'm about to tell you is going to feel completely wrong according to your training. Falcon 1. The pilot's voice carried confusion and maybe recognition of the legendary call sign. Cobra Base says I don't understand what's happening right now. You don't need to understand, Emma said firmly. You need to listen and do exactly what I tell you. Your hydraulics are cascading because the failure pattern is trying to preserve primary control systems that are already compromised. Standard procedure is to let the computer manage the cascade. That's killing you right now because the computer is making decisions based on normal failure parameters. This isn't normal. You need to override the computer and manually route hydraulic pressure through secondary systems that your training says are backup only. That's negative, Falcon 1. We don't route through secondary systems except as last resort. The instability risks. Are less than certain death, Emma interrupted. Listen to me, 7-7. I know this sounds insane. I know every instinct you have is screaming that I'm wrong. But my mother flew this exact scenario during test operations. She proved you can maintain control through secondary pathways if you accept temporary instability. You're going to feel like the aircraft is getting worse when you make these changes. It's going to feel like you're losing control. You're not. You're trading uncontrollable descent for controllable instability. And that trade keeps you alive. The pilot was breathing hard, audible over the radio. Emma could imagine him in the cockpit, strapped into an ejection seat that wouldn't eject, watching his instruments show failing systems, trying to decide if he should trust a stranger's voice telling him to violate every procedure he'd been trained to follow. Who are you? He asked finally. How do you know these procedures? I'm the daughter of the pilot who developed them, Emma said. I'm 13 years old. I'm sitting in the cockpit of a commercial flight right now because I recognized your failure pattern and I know how to save you. My mother was Falcon 1 before me. She died testing the procedures I'm about to give you. Her work was classified but never adopted because it seemed too dangerous. But she was right. And I've spent 3 years studying her research. And you're running out of time to decide whether you trust her legacy or not. Silence on the radio, broken only by the pilot's harsh breathing and warning tones from his cockpit instruments. Okay, he said finally. Okay, Falcon 1. Tell me what to do. Relief flooded through Emma so intensely she had to grip the pilot's seat to stay steady. First thing, reach overhead and find your hydraulic system control panel. You should see indicators for primary, secondary, and tertiary routing systems. Roger. I see them. Right now your primary system is showing red, degraded, about 12% capacity. Your secondary system is showing amber, standby mode, not engaged. Correct? Affirmative. You need to manually shut down the primary system completely and force engagement of secondary before the cascade reaches critical failure. The computer won't do this automatically because it's trying to preserve any primary function. But that primary system is dying anyway, and keeping it partially online is preventing clean transfer to secondary pathways. If I shut down primary and secondary doesn't engage cleanly, you lose everything and you die, Emma finished bluntly. But you're losing everything anyway. The cascade is going to take primary to 0 in the next 60 seconds regardless. At least this way you're controlling the transition instead of letting it happen chaotically. Another pause. The F-22 outside dropped another 100 feet. Time was running out. Shutting down primary hydraulics now, the pilot said. Emma's heart hammered as she watched the distant fighter lurch violently, the nose pitching down as primary controls went offline. For 3 seconds the F-22 looked like it was entering an uncontrolled dive. She heard the pilot grunt with effort as he fought the control stick. Secondary hydraulics engaging now. Wait, I'm getting control response. It's not smooth, but I'm getting. That's normal, Emma said quickly. The instability you're feeling is the secondary system's routing pressure through pathways that aren't designed for primary flight control. It's going to feel sluggish and imprecise. You need to adjust your control inputs, smaller movements, gentler corrections. You're not flying the jet the way you're used to. You're flying it like a cargo plane, using gross control movements instead of fighter precision. Roger. The pilot gasped. The F-22 had arrested its dive and was slowly, shakily leveling off. But the flight path was erratic, wings rocking with instability that made passengers on the commercial flight gasp. Next step, Emma continued, forcing her voice to stay calm. Your engine situation. You've got fire or damage in the port engine. Affirmative. Port engine is dying. I've already initiated shutdown sequence. Cancel that. Negative, Falcon 1. Standard procedure for engine fire is immediate shutdown to prevent catastrophic failure. Standard procedure assumes you have good flight controls, Emma countered. You don't. You're running on secondary hydraulics, which means reduced control authority. You need every bit of thrust you can get to maintain controllability, even if that engine is damaged. Shutting it down completely reduces your thrust margin to where you can't maintain altitude with your degraded controls. Throttle it back to minimum sustainable power, but keep it lit. That engine could explode. Or you could stall out and crash because you don't have enough power to maintain flight with your control issues, Emma said flatly. My mother tested this. She proved you can keep a damaged engine running long enough to reach emergency landing if the alternative is loss of controllability. Trust me. The pilot made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. I'm trusting a kid I've never met to keep me alive with procedures that sound like suicide. This is the strangest day of my career. Cancel the port engine shutdown, Emma repeated. Throttle back to 30% power. That'll minimize damage progression while maintaining thrust margin. Canceling shutdown. Throttle to 30%. Okay, I've still got thrust. Engine temperature is rising but holding in yellow range. Good. Now here's where it gets difficult. Emma pulled up her tablet with her free hand, opening one of her mother's most detailed documents. You need to manually reconfigure your flight control computer to accept the secondary hydraulic routing as primary operational mode. If you don't, the computer will keep trying to restore primary systems, and you'll get conflicting control inputs that'll tear the aircraft apart. How do I, wait? Flight control reconfiguration requires access codes I don't have in the cockpit. That's maintenance-level programming. Emma read off a 12-digit code from her tablet. Try this access sequence. My mother documented override codes for emergency field reconfiguration. The Air Force never changed them after her death because nobody thought they'd ever be needed. She heard typing sounds over the radio, fast and desperate. That worked. I'm in the configuration menu. What settings do I change? For the next 2 minutes, Emma walked the pilot through a series of technical adjustments that sounded like gibberish to everyone in the commercial cockpit. Captain Williams and his co-pilot exchanged glances but stayed silent, recognizing expertise far beyond their experience. Emma's voice never wavered as she guided the F-22 pilot through computer system reconfigurations that most Air Force ground crews would need manuals to attempt. Okay, the pilot said finally. Flight computer is reconfigured. I'm showing secondary hydraulics as primary operational mode now. And, yeah, control response feels better. More predictable. Still not normal, but definitely more stable. That's as good as it gets with this failure pattern, Emma told him. You're not going to have fighter-level maneuverability, but you've got enough control authority to reach a controlled landing if we can find you a suitable runway. Cobra Base is vectoring me toward Peterson Air Force Base, about 40 miles northeast of my current position. Can I make 40 miles with current engine status and fuel? Fuel's not an issue. You've got plenty. Engine status is concerning but holding stable. If nothing else fails, he stopped, and Emma heard the dark humor in his voice. Well, if nothing else fails, which feels unlikely at this point. You're going to make it, Emma said with more confidence than she felt. Just maintain current heading and altitude. Don't try any aggressive maneuvers. Treat the aircraft like it's made of glass and you're trying not to break it. Gentle corrections only. Roger that, Falcon 1. The pilot paused. Thank you. I don't know how you learned all this or why you're on a commercial flight giving tactical advice, but you just saved my life. You're not saved until you're on the ground, Emma said. But you're going to make it. The next 15 minutes felt like hours. Emma stayed on the radio frequency, monitoring the F-22 pilot's progress as he limped toward Peterson Air Force Base with his crippled fighter. The secondary hydraulics held. The damaged engine continued running despite temperatures that made everyone nervous. The flight control reconfigurations kept the aircraft stable enough for controlled flight. It wasn't pretty. The Raptor flew like a wounded bird, requiring constant corrections. But it flew. The commercial flight passengers had gone silent, watching through windows as the drama unfolded. Word had spread about the teenager in the cockpit, the girl calling herself Falcon 1 who was somehow talking down a dying fighter jet. People recorded on phones, took pictures, whispered theories. Emma heard none of it. Her entire focus was on the voice in her headphones, on the pilot who trusted her with his life, on making sure her mother's research continued working. Falcon 1, I have Peterson in sight, the pilot reported, and Emma could hear the relief in his voice. 11 miles out. Towers clearing emergency approach. Crash crews standing by. You're going to need a long rollout, Emma reminded him. Your braking authority is compromised with secondary hydraulics. Tell Tower you'll need full runway length and emergency arresting cables deployed. Already requested. They're ready for me. Emma watched through the commercial cockpit windscreen as the F-22 began its descent in the distance, dropping toward the Air Force Base runway barely visible on the horizon. The fighter's approach was rough, altitude control inconsistent, wings wobbling. But the pilot maintained control, fighting the damaged aircraft every foot of the way down. 3 miles out, the pilot reported. Gear coming down. Gear indicates 3 green lights. Okay, I've got landing gear. Easy on the approach, Emma said. Don't try to grease the landing. Get it on the runway and keep it straight. Pretty doesn't matter. Pretty went out the window about 20 minutes ago, the pilot said, and Emma heard the tight humor of someone seconds from either survival or catastrophe. 2 miles. 1 mile. Over the threshold now. The pilot's voice was tight with concentration. Flare. Touchdown. Even from miles away, Emma could see the puff of smoke as the F-22's wheels hit runway concrete. The fighter bounced slightly, landed again harder, and rolled out in a barely controlled straight line. The tail hook deployed and caught one of the emergency arresting cables, bringing the Raptor to a violent but successful stop. I'm down. The pilot's voice exploded over the radio with raw emotion. I'm stopped. I'm alive. Oh my God, I'm alive. The commercial cockpit erupted in cheers. Captain Williams was grinning, his co-pilot pumping his fist. Through the cockpit door, Emma could hear passengers applauding. She sagged against the pilot's seat, suddenly boneless with relief. Falcon 1, the pilot said, his voice thick with emotion. I don't know how to thank you. I should be dead right now. That aircraft should be scattered across Utah in 1,000 pieces. I don't understand what just happened, but you saved my life. My mother saved your life, Emma said quietly. I just remembered what she taught me. General Hayes came back on the frequency, his voice carrying emotions Emma couldn't quite identify. Falcon 1, this is Cobra Base. We're going to need to debrief you extensively about those procedures. What you just did, that should not have been possible. Our experts are reviewing the entire sequence, and nobody can quite believe what we just witnessed. It's all in my mother's research files, Emma said. The ones the Air Force classified but never adopted. Everything I told your pilot came from Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Rodriguez's documentation. She spent years developing these procedures. She proved they work. Maybe now people will actually listen. We're listening now, the general said. Falcon 1, Emma, that was the most remarkable piece of tactical aviation guidance I've witnessed in 30 years of service. We're going to want you to come to Cobra Base when your flight lands. There are people who need to meet you. We need to properly validate your mother's research that we should have validated years ago. Emma nodded even though he couldn't see her. Yes, sir. And Emma? Welcome to the Operational Air Force. You've earned that call sign today. I flew with your mother on 2 combat deployments. She'd be incredibly proud of you right now. Emma's vision blurred with tears she'd been holding back for the entire crisis. Thank you, sir. Captain Williams gently took the headset back, speaking briefly with Cobra Base before signing off the military frequency. He turned to Emma with an expression of pure wonder. "I've been flying for 23 years, he said slowly. "Commercial, military, cargo, I've seen a lot. But I have never seen anything like what you just did. How does a 13-year-old kid know emergency procedures for the most advanced fighter jet in the world?" "My mom taught me," Emma said simply. "Not directly. She died before she could. But she left her research, her notes, her knowledge. I spent 3 years learning everything she knew because it was the only way I had left to be close to her. I never thought I'd actually need to use any of it." "That pilot is alive because you did," Williams said. "That's what matters." Emma walked back through the cabin on shaky legs, acutely aware of every passenger staring at her. The whispers followed her. "That's her. She's just a kid. Did you hear what she did? Falcon 1. The businessman next to her seat was staring like she'd sprouted wings. The flight attendant was waiting at Emma's row, and when Emma slid back into her seat, she crouched down beside her. "I need to apologize," she said quietly. "I treated you like a child who needed looking after. I had no idea." "You couldn't have known," Emma said, too exhausted for the conversation to feel awkward. "I am a child. I'm 13. I do need looking after most of the time. Today just happened to be different. Your mother must have been an extraordinary person." "She was." Emma pulled her tablet back out, looking at the technical documents that had just saved a life, at her mother's handwriting in the margins. "She really was." Flight 447 continued to Seattle, but the atmosphere had transformed completely. Passengers kept glancing at Emma. Some with awe, some with confusion, all with recognition that they'd witnessed something remarkable. The young couple from the row ahead asked if they could take a picture with her. A businessman offered his business card. An older veteran with an Air Force pin came back. Stood at attention, and saluted her with tears in his eyes. Emma handled it all with awkward grace, still just a kid who didn't quite know what to do when adults treated her like someone important. When Flight 447 finally touched down at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, over 2 hours behind schedule, the gate agent's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've been informed that military personnel are waiting at the gate. All passengers please remain seated until our special passenger has deplaned." Emma gathered her backpack with shaking hands. This was real now. The Air Force was waiting. She'd used her mother's call sign operationally, saved a pilot's life, and validated research that had been dismissed for years. Nothing would be the same after she walked off this aircraft. The jetway door opened, and Emma stepped through to find herself facing an honor guard of Air Force officers in dress uniforms. General Hayes was there, silver stars gleaming, flanked by colonels and majors at attention. Behind them were news crews with cameras, base personnel, and in the distance, walking across the tarmac with medical assistants, the pilot of Falcon 77. Emma froze in the jetway doorway, suddenly terrified in a way she hadn't been during the emergency. This was too much attention, too many important people, too much weight settling onto shoulders that still belonged to a kid. General Hayes stepped forward and saluted her crisply. "Falcon 1, on behalf of the United States Air Force, thank you for your service today. You saved the life of Captain James Morrison and preserved a critical military asset through knowledge and tactical expertise that exceeded anything our most experienced personnel could provide. Your mother would be honored by what you accomplished." Emma returned the salute awkwardly, not quite sure of the protocol. "Thank you, sir. I just did what my mom would have done." "No," the general said gently. "You did what your mother spent her career preparing for but never got to see validated. You proved her research was correct. You honored her legacy in the most meaningful way possible." Captain Morrison reached the group, still in his flight suit, moving stiffly. He was younger than Emma expected, maybe late 20s. He stopped in front of Emma and slowly, formally came to attention and saluted. Falcon 1, I owe you my life. I don't have words adequate for what you did today. You trusted me when you had no reason to, Emma said, feeling her eyes burn with tears. That took more courage than anything I did. You gave me a reason to trust you, Morrison said. Every procedure you gave me worked perfectly. Your mother's research was brilliant, and you mastered it. Completely. That's not luck. That's skill and dedication and honoring a legacy in the most powerful way imaginable. One of the colonels stepped forward. Ms. Rodriguez, Emma, we've been reviewing your mother's research files in detail over the past 2 hours. The procedures you walked Captain Morrison through were documented exactly as you described, but they were never field-tested or validated because of concerns about risk. Your mother's final test flight was attempting to prove these procedures under controlled conditions when her aircraft experienced actual catastrophic failures. She died proving the procedures work, but because her data was lost with the aircraft, we couldn't validate her findings. Until today. Another officer added, today you provided us with perfect real-world validation. Everything your mother theorized proved correct under actual emergency conditions. We're fast-tracking her research for official adoption into F-22 emergency procedures. Every Raptor pilot in the Air Force is going to learn what you taught Captain Morrison today. Your mother's work will be taught at every level of fighter aviation training from this point forward. Emma's throat was too tight to speak. Her mother had been right. Sarah Rodriguez had spent her career pushing boundaries, developing procedures other people thought were too risky. She died proving her innovations worked. The Air Force had filed her research away, too uncertain to validate it. Until her daughter had used that same research to save a life. There's more, General Hayes said quietly. Captain Morrison has requested that you accompany him to Cobra Base for a formal recognition ceremony. Given the circumstances and your age, we'll need your guardian's permission, but we'd like to properly honor both you and your mother's contributions to Air Force aviation. This was an extraordinary event and it deserves extraordinary recognition. My aunt, Emma said. She lives here in Seattle. She's my legal guardian since my mom died. We've already contacted her, the general confirmed. She's quite eager to see you, as you might imagine. She's also given preliminary permission for the recognition ceremony, though we'll handle all formal arrangements to ensure you're properly supported. You're still a minor and we're very aware of our responsibility to treat you appropriately. Emma nodded, still processing everything. Can I ask something? Emma said quietly. Anything, General Hayes replied. My mom's research, when you teach it to other pilots, can you make sure they know it came from her? Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Rodriguez, Falcon 1. She spent years developing these procedures. She died testing them. I want people to know it was her work, not mine. I just remembered what she taught me. The general's expression softened. Every pilot who learns these procedures will know they came from Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Rodriguez. Her name will be attached to every document, every training module, every briefing. And they'll know that her daughter carried forward that legacy when it mattered most. Both of you will be remembered, Emma. I promise you that. Captain Morrison cleared his throat. Falcon 1, Emma, there's something else. The F-22 pilot community is pretty close. We all know about your mother, about the original Falcon 1. She was legendary among Raptor pilots even before today. And now you're going to be equally legendary. What you did today is going to be talked about in fighter squadrons for decades. You saved my life using knowledge your mother died developing. That's going to be part of Air Force history forever. Emma looked at him, this pilot who trusted a 13-year-old's voice when every instinct probably told him it was insane. Thank you for believing me. I know how crazy it must have sounded. Desperate people accept help from unexpected places, Morrison said with a slight smile. And the moment you started talking, I could hear the expertise in your voice. You knew exactly what you were talking about. That knowledge didn't come from a kid playing video games. It came from serious study of serious material. Your mother trained you well, even if she did it through documents rather than direct instruction. The airport terminal behind the military personnel was filling with curious travelers, people pulling out phones, reporters trying to push forward. General Hayes gestured to his staff. Let's get you somewhere less public. We've arranged a private area where you can reunite with your aunt, and we can handle media inquiries appropriately. You're a minor who just went through significant trauma, even if you handled it brilliantly. We need to protect you as much as honor you. Emma followed the honor guard through the terminal, flanked by officers who cleared a path. People were shouting questions, calling her a hero. She kept her eyes forward, clutching her backpack, trying to remember that she was still just Emma Rodriguez from Denver, still 13 years old, still a kid who had homework due next week. But she was also Falcon 1 now. Not just in name, not just as inherited legacy, but operationally. She'd used the call sign under actual emergency conditions. She'd provided tactical guidance that saved a life. She'd honored her mother's memory in the most meaningful way possible by proving Sarah Rodriguez's work was correct and valuable and worth remembering. In a private airport lounge, Emma's Aunt Rebecca was waiting, and the moment Emma walked through the door, she was swept into a crushing hug. Rebecca was crying, holding Emma tight, whispering, oh my God, I saw the news. I can't believe, you're okay. You're okay. I'm fine, Aunt Becca, Emma said, her own tears finally breaking free. I'm okay. I did what Mom taught me. That's all. I just remembered what she knew. Rebecca pulled back, holding Emma's face in both hands, studying her with eyes that were Sarah's eyes, the same dark brown Emma saw in the mirror every morning. Your mother would be so proud of you. So incredibly proud. You honored her legacy in a way I don't think any of us imagined when we gave you that call sign. We thought maybe someday when you were older, when you'd had time to train, but you were ready today. You were ready when it mattered. I spent 3 years getting ready, Emma said. I studied her files every day. I memorized procedures I never thought I'd use. I just wanted to understand what she knew, to feel close to her somehow. I didn't think. You saved someone's life, Rebecca interrupted gently. You took everything your mother taught you, everything she spent her career developing, and you used it to keep a pilot from dying. That's what heroes do, Emma. They step up when nobody expects them to, when the odds seem impossible, and they do what needs to be done. Over the next hour, they handled logistics, transportation to Cobra Base for the recognition ceremony, media statement preparation, security arrangements, discussion of how to return Emma to normal life despite everything that had changed. Through it all, Emma felt herself pulled in two directions, the kid who wanted to go home and hide and process everything, and the inheritor of Falcon 1 who recognized that responsibilities came with the call sign. Captain Morrison stayed for the entire meeting, insisting he wanted to be part of Emma's support system. You saved my life, he said simply when the general asked if he needed medical evaluation. I'm not leaving until I'm sure she's taken care of. As evening fell over Seattle and the airport slowly emptied, Emma sat in a quiet lounge with her aunt, the officers having stepped out to coordinate final arrangements. Through the window, she could see planes taking off and landing, routine operations continuing despite the extraordinary events of the day. Do you think Mom knows? Emma asked quietly. Wherever she is, do you think she knows what happened today? Rebecca put an arm around her shoulders. I think if there's any way for her to know, she does. And I think she's incredibly proud. Not just because you saved Captain Morrison, but because you honored her work, trusted her research when nobody else would, and proved she was right all along. That's what mattered to your mother, being right about the flying, about the procedures, about pushing boundaries to save lives. You validated everything she believed in. Emma leaned against her aunt's shoulder, exhausted beyond words. I miss her so much. I know, honey. I know. Using her call sign today felt like she was there with me. Like she was guiding me, telling me what to say. Does that sound crazy? Not even a little bit, Rebecca assured her. You spent 3 years absorbing her knowledge, studying her words, learning how she thought. Of course it felt like she was there. In a very real way, she was. She taught you everything you needed to know, even though she couldn't teach you directly. That's an extraordinary gift she left you. Through the window, Emma noticed something that made her breath catch. 4 F-22 Raptors were flying in formation over the airport, their distinctive silhouettes unmistakable against the darkening sky. As she watched, they executed a missing man formation, 4 aircraft flying in tight group, then one suddenly pulling up and away, leaving a gap that represented fallen warriors. That's for your mother, General Hayes said quietly, having returned to the lounge. And for you. The F-22 community wanted to honor both Falcon ones, the one who developed the procedures and the one who proved they work. That missing man formation is their way of saying thank you to Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Rodriguez for her sacrifice, and welcome to you for carrying forward her legacy. Emma watched the fighters until they disappeared into the distance, the missing position in their formation a powerful reminder of absence and loss, and legacy continued. Her mother was gone, had been gone for 3 years, would be gone for the rest of Emma's life. But her knowledge remained. Her research continued saving lives. And her call sign lived on through a daughter who'd proven today that love expressed through intensive study could honor the dead while protecting the living. Falcon 1, Emma whispered to the empty sky where the fighters had flown. Not claiming the call sign, not announcing herself, just acknowledging the weight and privilege of bearing a name that represented excellence and sacrifice and the responsibility of carrying forward what extraordinary people left behind. The Air Force officers began coordinating departure, preparing to transport Emma and her aunt home with security escorts given the media attention likely waiting. Captain Morrison came over one last time, crouching to Emma's eye level. I'm going to see you next week at the ceremony, he said. But I wanted to say something now before all the official stuff. What you did today took courage I can barely comprehend. You were brave enough to speak up when everyone thought you were just a kid. You were confident enough to trust your knowledge against the judgment of military experts. And you were skilled enough to guide me through procedures that saved my life. Those 3 things, courage, confidence, and skill, are what make great pilots. You already have all 3 at 13 years old. Whatever you decide to do with your life, whatever path you take, you're going to be extraordinary at it. Just like your mother was. Thank you, Emma managed. I'm glad you're okay. I'm glad the procedures worked. Your mother's procedures worked, Morrison corrected gently. She figured this out years ago. She just needed someone brave enough to trust her research when it mattered. You were that person. Don't forget that. The drive to Rebecca's house was surreal, military escort vehicles, Air Force officers in her aunt's minivan, neighbors standing in yards staring as the convoy pulled up. Inside the familiar house, surrounded by photos of her mother in uniform and her own school pictures, Emma finally let herself collapse. The adrenaline drained away, leaving her hollow and exhausted. Rebecca ordered pizza because neither had energy for cooking. They ate in the living room, not talking much, processing the day through silence. Emma's phone buzzed constantly with messages from friends who'd seen the news, from school, from reporters. Rebecca gently took the phone and set it aside. You don't have to answer any of that tonight, she said. Tonight you're just Emma. Just my niece who had the most insane day imaginable and needs to rest. The world can wait. But Emma found she couldn't rest, her mind replaying everything. The smoking F-22. The decision to speak up. The shock in Captain Morrison's voice. The procedures flowing from her memory as if her mother was beside her. The relief of hearing, I'm down. I'm alive. Do you think I did the right thing? Emma asked suddenly. Speaking up, using Mom's call sign, all of it. Rebecca looked at her with surprise. Emma, you saved someone's life. How could that possibly not be the right thing? But what if I'd been wrong? What if the procedures hadn't worked? What if Captain Morrison died because the Air Force listened to a kid instead of their experts? But you weren't wrong, Rebecca said firmly. Your mother's research was correct. You trusted her knowledge and it saved a life. Yes, there was risk involved, but the alternative was certain death for that pilot. You gave him a chance when he had none. That's always the right choice. The Air Force dismissed Mom's research because it seemed too dangerous, Emma continued. They thought she was taking unnecessary risks. And then she died testing those procedures, which probably made them even more convinced they were right. But today proved she was right all along. If they'd validated her research years ago, how many pilots could have been saved? Rebecca was quiet for a long moment. That's a heavy question, honey, and not one with a comfortable answer. Your mother was a pioneer. She pushed boundaries that made people uncomfortable. Sometimes pioneers pay the price for being ahead of their time. But because of what you did today, her work won't be dismissed anymore. Every pilot who learns her procedures from now on will have a better chance of surviving impossible situations. That's her legacy now. That's what you helped create. Emma nodded slowly, accepting the weight of it. I'm going to have to be different now, Emma said quietly. After today, I can't just be regular Emma anymore. People know about Falcon 1. They know I have this knowledge. The Air Force is going to want me involved in validating Mom's other research, maybe even developing new procedures. I'll have responsibilities that normal 13-year-olds don't have. Are you okay with that? Rebecca asked gently. Emma thought about it, really considered the question. Was she okay with her childhood effectively ending? With accepting responsibilities beyond her years? With being known as the kid who saved the F-22 pilot for the rest of her life? I think I have to be, she said finally. Because this is what I chose when I decided to inherit Mom's call sign. It wasn't just a name or a tribute. It was accepting responsibility for carrying forward what she started. Today proved that responsibility is real, not ceremonial. I can't go back to being just a kid now. That chance ended the moment I said, "This is Falcon 1" over the radio. You're still allowed to be a kid, Rebecca insisted. You're 13 years old. You still need to do homework and hang out with friends and worry about normal teenager things. What happened today doesn't erase your right to have a normal life. But it changes it, Emma said. Forever. I'm okay with that, Aunt Becca. Really? Mom spent her career working to save pilots' lives. If I can continue that work, if I can help validate her research and make sure other pilots benefit from what she discovered, then that's how I want to honor her memory. Not by trying to be normal, but by being worthy of the call sign she left me. Rebecca pulled her into another hug, and Emma felt her aunt's tears against her hair. Your mother would be so proud of you. And I'm proud of you too. Not just for what you did today, but for the person you're choosing to be. That takes courage too, accepting responsibility instead of running from it. They sat together on the couch as night deepened outside, the neighborhood growing quiet. Emma's phone continued buzzing, but she ignored it, content to just sit with her aunt and process the extraordinary day. Somewhere in the night, pilots were flying missions, relying on procedures that kept them safe. Tomorrow, those same pilots would learn about new emergency procedures developed by Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Rodriguez and validated by her 13-year-old daughter. They'd study the techniques that had saved Captain Morrison's life. They'd practice maneuvers Sarah had pioneered and Emma had proven effective. And they'd know the call sign Falcon 1 represented not just one extraordinary pilot, but a legacy carried forward through love and loss and determination. Emma finally fell asleep on the couch, exhausted beyond measure, her tablet beside her still showing her mother's technical documents. In her dreams, she was flying, not in a cockpit, but alongside her mother, watching Sarah Rodriguez pilot an F-22 through impossible maneuvers with skill that defied conventional wisdom. You did good today, baby girl, dreamed Sarah said, her voice clear and warm and proud. You trusted what I taught you. You saved a life. That's what being Falcon 1 means, being willing to do what seems impossible to protect people who matter. I miss you, Mom, Dream Emma replied. I know. But I'm still with you. In everything you learn from my research. In every procedure you memorized. In every moment you choose courage over fear. That's how love continues after death, through knowledge passed forward, through legacies honored, through children who grow up to be the kind of warriors their parents would be proud of. Emma woke Saturday morning to sunlight and the smell of coffee and her aunt moving quietly in the kitchen. For a moment, she was just a kid who'd fallen asleep on the couch. Then memory returned, the F-22, Captain Morrison, the emergency procedures, the honor guard, and she realized yesterday had been real. Her phone showed 247 unread messages. The news was running her story as breaking headlines. And somewhere at Cobra Base, Air Force personnel were beginning the process of officially adopting Sarah Rodriguez's research into standard F-22 training. Emma Rodriguez, 13 years old, call sign Falcon 1, had saved a pilot's life yesterday and changed Air Force aviation forever. She'd done it not by being extraordinary herself, but by trusting that her mother's extraordinary work deserved recognition. By understanding that love expressed through intensive study could honor the dead. By proving that sometimes the most legendary call signs pass to the next generation not through ceremony, but through desperate moments when inherited knowledge saves lives long after those who developed it are gone. Her mother would be proud. Emma was sure of that now. And that was enough.